your eyes closed and live in a whole different world. But Mrs. Frost, I definitely can see it, and I can feel it, and we're experiencing it, and you know what? And we were expecting it because it happens every single time before revival, doesn't it, Donna? Every single time before revival, stuff happens. And it's just Satan. All it is Satan. And so it really helps me to understand, okay, revival's coming. And my husband will say, Julie, prepare yourself. And we do. But the Lord has resurfaced this lesson. He put it in my mind. And it's one that I did a couple years ago. And I always feel so guilty digging out lessons. But then I'm like, why, you know? But it's because, and sometimes, I've told you this before, sometimes it takes more to pull it out and go, you know, redo kind of that thing than it does just to do up a new lesson. But there are ones over the years that the Lord just like he did, he just will bring it to my mind, and I just love how he works and gives that affirmation of things. This lesson today is called When the Javelin is Aimed at Your Heart. Wish I had a javelin so I could show you what it looks like. But this is, anything with David always captures my interest. I just love the Bible character of David on many different levels. Let's take, we're going to take a look at a sequence of events that led up to David, or that lead up to David being anointed king of Israel. We're going to go to 1 Samuel 16. 1 Samuel 16 and verses 1 to 13. Tiff, in a nice loud voice, will you read those for me?
1 through 13. Okay.
Yep.
And the Lord said unto Samuel, How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil, and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite. For I have provided me a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, Take a heifer with thee, and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show thee what thou shalt do, and thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee. And Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem, and the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, Comest thou peacefully? And he said, Peaceably. I am come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourselves, and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons, and called them to the sacrifice. And it came to pass, when they were come, that he looked at Eliab, and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab, and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. Then Jesse made Shammah to pass by, and he said, Neither has the Lord chosen this. Again Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, The Lord hath not chosen these. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ready, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil, and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah.
Okay, thank you. I know that was a mouthful, but it's good. We really need the backstory. So here we have the prophet Samuel. Saul is king at this time, okay? But God tells Samuel, the prophet Samuel, Saul's not going to be king any longer, and I'm going to show you who's going to be king. So in the sequence of events, number 1 is what we just read. God shows Samuel that David is to be king, not his brothers. it's very interesting to me, who we think should be doing this or that in God's work. This person should be a pastor. And what God chooses is so different. If you could know my husband from when we were kids and we were, he was in school, the guy didn't talk. It was amazing, And I remember, I literally remember he was walking down the school hallway, looking down like he always did because he was shy. And I remember going, hey, and
Not
just
shy.
like, no, I wasn't. I'm like, man, he doesn't talk. But it's amazing to see what God has done in his life. And also, this is another thing that just blows me away. I knew to me, most of the time, the kids that were in the lowest class, because we had a tier system at our school. You had general studies, and this is in high school, general studies, shop, and then general, and then college prep, okay? And I was in the college prep, but you just have to know, I was fighting to stay on that bottom tier of college prep, and my friends, like my girlfriend, my best friend, she just would breeze through. She was valedictorian, and I'm like fighting and clawing to get, to even stay in this group. And then Pastor was a shop kid. And so he really, when I finally got him to talk to me, like towards the last of school, he was sitting in the library with his friends, and they were all doing his work so he could pass, and graduate like in a couple weeks, So, I mean, and so to see that, and that he was never had to push himself, never any, can't do that level of work. And maybe he could, maybe he couldn't. But to look now and see the amount of Bible that man knows and can, and it is absolutely amazing. And that's the Lord. And then the discernment that God gives him as a pastor. This not a shop kid, and I, I guess you would have had to go to school to know this tier system. Do they not have that here? Probably, do they?
Yeah,
anyway,
I did.
yeah. So, I almost felt like the shop kids, they were usually out around the shop smoking is what they were doing, smoking and just not really doing anything. So, and to look, he probably could have been in college prep for sure. But just to look at the work that God does in us now, what we think would be the best choice is not what God uses. So that's why. So Samuel's like, well, it must be this brother. He's tall, he's good looking, all that. And God's like, nope, keep going. And they goes through all the sons of Jesse's, and he's like, well, is there even another son? Oh yeah, there's David. And that's what the brothers are like. Yeah, David. He's out watching the sheep, but surely he can't be it. Turns out he was it. He was going to be the next anointed. So 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 14 says, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. So here, the Spirit of the Lord departs Saul, and now an evil spirit falls upon him and troubles him at time. I mean, and in my mind, I just pictured just a tormented soul. He doesn't have any peace, and he just gets very agitated and very upset, and maybe his body reacts in some way. But I don't know if you've ever met a tormented soul. And I have. Well, I don't, and there was just no help aside from the Lord that we could give them. And that was the help that we said, you're only going to get away from it. And this was the same with Saul. Saul disobeyed God in chapter 15 because God told him to, what is the name? It starts with an A. The Amalekites. In chapter 15, God told Saul, kill all the Amalekites, all of them.
Yep, and he did.
And everything that goes with them, but he did not. He left the king alive, and then sheep and oxen and all that. So now there's a price to pay for disobedience. And so Saul is having his kingdom taken from him. And not only is the kingdom being taken from him, but so is his peace of mind. So the Spirit of the Lord departs, and an evil spirit comes and troubles him. Now the next thing in the series of sequence events is verse 21. And that says, and David came to Saul and stood before him. Saul is David's king. Now David has already been told he's going to be king. But he has such great respect and love for Saul, and he became his armor bearer. And then the next one in number 4, 1 Samuel 16, verses 22 to 24. Verse 22 says, and Saul sent to Jesse, David's dad, saying, let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in my sight. Verse 23, and it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took a harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. And to me that is, why did I say verse 24? There is no verse 24. So it's to verse 23, 22 and 23. God sends an evil spirit upon Saul, and then they're trying to find some way to soothe Saul, because the agitation level, all that, he's just a miserable, tormented soul now when this evil spirit comes on. And someone says, I know of a young man that plays the harp really, really well. And they must have heard him, whatever. And they go and they bring David. Let this show you the power of music. Be careful what you listen to. Okay? So David comes and he plays the harp. And when he does that, the evil spirit departs. And the Bible says, and Saul is well. That is a huge thing. Nothing else. And I'm sure they tried everything they could. Nothing else worked except for they brought David, who David himself knew the Lord, had a good countenance, and had a walk with God. And when David played, I believe somebody else that wasn't walking with God, that didn't know the Lord, God of Israel, could have came and played that same tune on that same harp, and it wouldn't have made a difference. Yeah. Okay? But because it was David who walked with God, who had a relationship with God, that's why the spirit departed. God used the harp and David. Okay? Let me just bring this just down to, something we can relate to. You can have a song sung by somebody, a hymn that's a great hymn, but sung by somebody that is living a totally different lifestyle, and it's not going to have the same effect on us as it does the person who's standing up in church, singing from the hymn book with their heart, just wanting to serve God and loving God at that moment, and who is trying to walk with God in their daily life. There's a whole different spirit behind that than there is the other one that we just spoke of. So anyway, that's free. Number 5, the next one is verses 17, or chapter 17, verse 50. So David prevailed over the Philistine, which was Goliath, with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. David goes up against Goliath, doesn't even have a sword in his hand. Just a small, ruddy boy that used to take care of the sheep, and now he has killed the Philistine without a sword, when no one else would, even King Saul. And King Saul stood like a whole head higher than everybody. He was a big man. And little David, he just used a sling and a stone, and God. And God made that stone go right into the giant's head, and he went down. So then the next one is, okay, so you see all these things about David, and then the next one is chapter 18, verses 6 to 9. And it came to pass, they're coming back from victories, and it came to pass as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all cities of Israel, singing and dancing. This was a happy group of people, to meet King Saul with tabrets with joy and with instruments of music. Verse 7, and the women answered one another, as women do. They were chit-chatting. And they played and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. uh-oh. Okay, were what they were saying was right. It was true. God had allowed, well, King Saul had backed down. He wouldn't go fight Goliath. And here he is tormented, all the time because the Spirit of God's left him. And so here we have David, and he is slaying, 10 times the people plus this giant that was harassing the children of God. So this does not make Saul happy. The people are singing David's praises instead of King Saul's, and now Saul wants him dead. And 1 Samuel 18, verses 10 and 11, go to verse 10. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house, and David played with his hand as at other times. And there was a javelin. Okay, javelin's like some type of throwing knife, in Saul's hand. Verse 11, and Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. So Saul cast that javelin, and he fully intended to kill David. But guess what? Not going to kill David until God's ready for that. And he wasn't. So, David avoided him and went up. But we just saw that David went from favor. Remember, Jesse, let your son David come. Let him come, and he's my armor bearer, and now I want him here all the time. And, and he loves David because David's the only one that can make that evil spirit depart from him. Just think of the deepest, darkest time of depression that you've had. The deepest, darkest time. And Saul was tormented way beyond that. Because we have the Lord. Every one of you has given me a testimony of, and if you haven't, make today the day, has given me a testimony of salvation. And when we have that, it doesn't mean that we don't go through hard times, okay? But Saul, the Spirit of the Lord had departed from him. He was tormented. And so David come and play, and he loved David, and he was part of his house. And this is how he got to know his daughter. I don't know if I'm saying her name, Michela or Michela. That's how he probably got to know her, and living in that same house. And so, he went from favor with the king as his armor bearer, harp player, victor over the Philistine Goliath for Israel, to now having the king attempt to kill him. He's in his house, living in his house, thought he was experiencing favor, thought the king loved him, thought everyone around him was loving him. All of a sudden, there's a javelin whizzing by his head, and that's what he wanted to kill him. And over the next 15 years or so, Saul continues to seek David's life. He wants to kill him. He doesn't want to scare him. He wants to kill him. And David's on the run, and he's hiding in caves, and he even goes and lives in the land of the Philistines for over a year. And why? Say, why would he do this? Why did King Saul turn? Because David was a constant reminder to Saul that God had taken the kingdom from him because of his disobedience in chapter 15. Okay? Sin always has a consequence. And Saul didn't like that consequence. And instead of being godly and saying, I messed up, which is what David did, by the way. When David messed up with Bathsheba, and he did mess up, and then he also had numbered the people. There were several instances in David's life where he messed up, but he asked for forgiveness, and he accepted the consequence. There's an RU, Reformers Unanimous, which is an addictions program principle that says accept the guilt, because there's like 10 principles. Accept the guilt. No. I'm paraphrasing. Accept the responsibility, and God will remove the guilt. Okay? You have to accept the responsibility for when we do mess up, when we do sin. David did it, Saul didn't. Okay? Saul could have been godly even though he had messed up and not done what God said with the Amalekites, but he didn't. And so, God was going to take his kingdom, But he should have made the choice to be godly after that, but he didn't. Instead, the evil spirit comes on him, and now he's a mess. But he didn't like the result of doing things his own way. So he spent his days like a madman hunting David so he could make David pay with his life. That's what he wanted. Have you ever felt, and I have you ever felt like a javelin was aimed at your heart by someone you trusted, someone you loved? That's what David went through. He loved Saul. He respected Saul. Saul was his king, and he lived in his home. And then all of a sudden, this man who he loved is trying to kill him. And we go through times like that. Even somebody who says that they love God, and yet they're throwing javelins at my heart, and I can't understand it. We all have, and maybe you're even experiencing it right now. There's a verse in the Bible that says joy comes in the morning. I always hang on to that, because sometimes knowing that someone is casting javelins at my heart hurts so bad I don't know what to do with the pain. And then God just says, just give it to me. Because I'm weak and he's strong. I don't know the answers. He does know the answers. And do you know that all the javelins that get thrown at your heart, the hurts in your life, the person on the other end doesn't always know what they're doing. Okay? And I have to go back and remind myself of that too, is that there have been times I've thrown javelins and not even known it. Our words are so powerful. Our actions are so powerful. And so when I'm hurting from that, I have to remember what a pastor told us a while back, a few years ago, Brother Kurt Skelly, hurting people hurt people. Okay? And when it seems like I'm just standing here and they're aiming at me, I have to understand most of the time that's not even the case. It feels that way, but that's not really the case. Most of the time, people don't understand what they're doing. But there are instances in your life where people do know what they're doing and they're aiming right for your heart. I mean, that's what was happening to David. But the thing is, the question is, how do we handle it? When the javelin is pointed at us, how do we handle that? Here's what David did, and here's what we should do. Go to 1 Samuel 18, verse 14. Anyone want to read that?
I will.
Go ahead, Donna.
And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him.
Goodness. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Do you know when I can feel the sting of the javelin, because sometimes they feel like they land on me, I want to behave wisely. I really, really do. But I don't always do that. And that makes me so sad later. And I have to ask God to forgive me. It's keeping that short sin account with God. And it's just like, God, I'm sorry I just said that. God understands our feelings, okay? He understands our feelings, our infirmities. He gets it. And it's not wrong when something hurts me. It's not wrong for that to sting. That's nothing I did. But what is wrong is if I don't, and I lash out, and I don't behave wisely, okay? That's what God wants for us. He wants us to behave wisely, just like David did. And the Lord was with him. Okay? And the choices. We talk about this all the time. You can open a door if you want. We talk about it all the time. Our life is full of choices. As Christian women, we make choices that affect our life. They affect how, in essence, how tomorrow's going to go for us. The choices I make today, they determine what tomorrow's going to be like. We don't think that. We're like, oh, I just have to, trudge through. No, we don't. We can make the choice to behave wisely, and the Lord will be with me. And because David behaved wisely, I mean, stop and think. The man that he loved and respected, who was his king, who he had helped. David helped Saul so much. And now he's trying to kill him. The feelings that must have gone through so much that he has to go on the run and leave his family for 15 years. You know? So his whole life was turned upside down. And so David behaved wisely, and the Lord was with him, and because of that, some things happened. Okay? So one thing that happened is in verse 15. Let's see, it must be 18. Okay, chapter 18, verse 15. Here's something that happened because David behaved himself wisely. Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. Saul's like, whoa, I am trying to kill him, and he is not lashing out. He is not trying to come hunt me. That's a very different, that's what you would expect. If they're trying to chase him and kill him, then the expectation is he's going to turn around and do it back. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. And Saul took notice of that. When we have the javelin aimed at our heart and we're hurting, just remember this: people are watching. And how I behave affects those around me. And it's very important. So Saul grew more afraid of David because of what he saw. He's like, wow, this is something that I don't have. Now, the next thing that happened is verse 15. Oh, that is not right. 16. Put 16 there. Yeah. That second bullet is verse 16. Is that all Israel loved David. Verse 16. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them. Everybody loved him because he behaved wisely, and God was with him, and they could see it. So everybody loved him, and he had the favor of the people. And then another thing that happened because he behaved wisely is in verse 28. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David. Okay, we're going to stop right there. When tough times and hard things and hurtful things come into my life because of the way I behave, can the lost and saved people say, man, she must walk with God, because how else could she handle that? I think of my mom. How else could she handle what she's going through like she is? Except she walks with God. I want people to look at me and say that. Not for Julie's sake, but because this is what that does. Joanna, you're going to come up on some hard times. You're already going through them. And it's gonna be a hurt that you've never ever known. But it's so important that through all the hurt and through all the tears that you do this, because that's what she would want. And that's what God wants. And that just, it's hard to think of someone so little and young having a legacy, so to speak, but she does, all over the world. And we want that to continue. So you pray for Joanna that as she goes through this deep, dark valley, that she feels the comfort of God. And while she's hanging on to the feet of God, her other hand is doing this. Okay? But she needs us praying for that. But for us, think of the hard times in your life. That's what we need to do too. We need to hang on to the feet of God going, I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't. But here we go. Here we go. I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to praise you. I'm still going to serve you. This hurts beyond anything I've ever known, but I'm still going to praise you. And so the people, Saul saw that about David, and he said, man, trying to kill this guy, and he's still not coming after me. I can tell God is with him. Let's have the world and save people. Save people watch too. But I just think of my dad, how he watches everything. And he's done this for how many years? His whole married life. My mom's been saved and he is not. and he has watched Christians in her life, and many of them were not doing this. And he, Dad still has to make his own choices and accounts, but there are some Christians that have to answer for how they lived a very un-Christ-like life in front of my dad. They were not doing this. I want to be the Christian that is doing this, and maybe someone will accept Christ because of it. I don't know. We may never know. Another thing that happened as a result of David behaving himself wisely is that David had a great testimony or good name among Israel. Verse 30 of chapter 18. Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and came to pass after they went forth that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. Can you imagine during all this craziness that's going on, and Saul and all his huge army and all of them chasing David, trying to kill him, that David's just shining for the Lord during all this. And so much so that whether it be in David's group of men or whether it be in Saul's group of men, they were all talking about him. Kind of like I talk about my mom with you guys. Yeah. Because when the Spirit of the Lord is on somebody like that, and their life and their testimony is so powerful that you can't help but talk. I can't help but talk about what I'm seeing in my mom. It's exciting, and I want to be like that. I bet those men in Saul's army are like, man, that David? Wow. I want what he has. Yeah, they're on the enemy team, but they were stopping and taking notice too. So I thought that was pretty awesome that because David behaved wisely, he had a good name. The next one, the king's own son Jonathan loved David and spoke good of David to his father. Okay, and we're just going to have to go through this. You can catch up on those verses later. The next thing was the Lord answers David's question about going to battle with the Philistines. Okay, so see, because David is walking with God and behaving himself wisely, the Lord is with him. So when David went and said, should we go up to battle? God answered him, and he heard him. Sometimes when we feel like like, God, why aren't you answering me? It could be that we're not behaving ourselves wisely, and we can't even hear the Lord. Okay, so David could. So that was a result of him behaving himself wisely. And then the next to the last bullet said, another thing that happened was the Lord protects David from Saul's hand. Look at chapter 23, verse 14. And David abode in the wilderness in strongholds, and remained in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day. Okay? Don't just think it just says every day and it means like, oh, most of the time. No, every day. This man was tormented, and he hunted David like an animal. But God, I love that. But God,
Yes.
I'm going to actually circle that. But God. Okay? Saul's hunting him like an animal, but God delivered him not into his hand. Saul wasn't going to get him if God didn't want him to get him. And I apply that to everything in my life. If we are walking with God and we're doing our best to live for God, trust God to take care of you. Trust him to take care of you. So the Lord protects David from Saul's hand. If David had not behaved himself wisely, the Lord wouldn't have been in bad behavior at all, and then Saul could have gotten to him. But because David behaved himself wisely, the Lord was with him, and he took care of him and protected him. And then the Lord delivers Saul into David's hand, and David wisely spares his life. We're not going to go read it, but on your own time, read that, 24, 1 to 15. David has the opportunity to kill Saul. And his comrades that have been running with him, for their life too, they say, do it, kill him. Here he is. God has delivered him into your hand. And David said, he's the Lord's anointed. I'm not going to do it. So instead, he cuts a piece of Saul's skirt off and shows Saul and said, I had the opportunity. I didn't. When the javelins are aimed at my heart, I'm going to have opportunity to talk about the person that's throwing. And it could hurt. And words hurt. And my words could hurt, maybe in the eyes of the listener, or maybe it got back to the person. But it would be so much better if instead of killing, I just cut the piece of skirt and just held it and said, okay, this is better. And then I'm not killing the person that's thrown the javelin. How about us? Do we behave ourselves wisely when we're facing the javelin? David had the chance to kill Saul, but because he walked with the Lord, he didn't. There's the point. If I'm not walking with the Lord, then when I have the opportunity to kill somebody that's throwing javelins at my heart, I'm going to do it. That's our sinful flesh nature, is, boy, you want to hurt me? Let me just hurt you back. But if I'm walking with God, then I will not do that. David knew that vengeance is not his, but the Lord's. Romans 12:19. I'm not quoting it verbatim, but vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Okay, that's who has vengeance. So when the javelin is aimed at your heart, behave wisely like David and walk with God, and he'll be with us. And he will walk us through, and we'll come out on the other side. What is 12:19? Go ahead.
Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord.
Okay? Vengeance is not mine, vengeance is his. If I'm walking with him, he's going to take care of everything, and I'll come out on the other side of my hurt. And I will be able to say, okay, I'm glad that I behaved wisely in the Lord. After everything was said and done, I know David was glad that he hadn't killed Saul, and that he had behaved wisely in such a way that he had the respect of all his people who were now his kingdom. And he was their king. And he had their respect because way back when rubber met road and circumstances were very difficult for him and his life was in danger, he had chosen to behave wisely. Let's behave wisely and walk with God. Thank you, friends, online friends.